This meeting is.
First, I'd like to say welcome, but check your cell phones and turn them off. I think I just did. Mine is turned off.
If you have a book on CD or book on, you listen, what's that called? No, audiobook. On Friday, I was sitting and talking here, and some of these audiobooks started playing right in the middle.
Oh, yes, it is. I was here.
Yeah.
That's why I'm asking you to turn your cell phones off. I was sitting there listening to the book. Okay. Well, welcome. We have a nice group here, and we have at the moment 9 people on Zoom. So there's quite a few of us listening in today. First of all, I would really, really like to congratulate the Ways and Means Committee. Beverly is a member, and Sanaya is a member. They have been, there's Phyllis is, and LJ is. Oh, Dorothy Pam, and Dorothy Pam is too. They have all been working their heads off this last year and have made over $5,000. We have met our goal so that we can give the full amount in scholarships and in community service awards. We're having a board meeting this week, and so we'll decide how we should parcel those out. But they've done a great job. Those of you who went to the Estella Oleski concert know that it was wonderful, as always. The flower show was just plain fun. A lot of people, everybody happy to get out of the spring. And for those of you who came this last weekend for the wine tasting, we had a lot of fun. And it was very interesting. We were very informative. And even if you don't like wine, it's still a fun time to be together and have a little bit of a potluck afterwards. So congratulations to everybody in Ways and Means. I noticed that there's a long list on the sign-up sheet. Thank you very much, Dottie, for manning that. It is 2 weeks away. The spring luncheon is the 25th of April. So if you have not as yet signed up, please, you don't have to do anything except sign up and say whether you're going to bring a salad or a dessert, and then come and enjoy, hopefully, a nice spring day in the end of April. I have a few announcements to make. First of all, well, I won't do it. You want to do it? The raffle? Quilt raffle.
Well, we are raffling off a quilt. The tickets are $2 each for one chance, or you can get 6 tickets for $10. It's on display in the back here. Yeah, it needs modeling in the room. It's a lovely, lovely job. So please send me if you'd like to buy some tickets from the end of the raffle. The drawing will be at the luncheon too. The draw is that day. Thank you.
And then Lois has something that she would like to announce. Lois?
Oh, yes. Thank you. Here in our beloved house, on May 1st at 3 o'clock, there will be a voice recital, free. And I brought a copy of the program if anybody wants to peruse it to see if there's something on it you might like. We are featuring Fanny Mendelssohn. All her music had originally all gone under her brother's name, and she never had the fame due her. She only lived for 45 years, but we are doing a whole little group of her songs, including a duet that she wrote for Suleika and Aha. So there are, and also there of interest, there are court viol songs at the end of the program, not to be missed, which are really a hoot. And then there's also accompanied by violin, Diana Keeley, who is, as many know, a wonderful violinist. She's accompanying a tenor in songs from William Blake, the mystical poet, William Blake. And so I'll leave the program right here on the table on the side so that you can look at it and decide and mark it down. May 1st at 3 o'clock here, no charge. Thank you.
Thank you, Lois, very much. Ah, yes. That mysterious glass right there is for you, Jane.
Thank you.
Okay, it usually goes here, but as you know, we've had a little problem with the podium today. Okay, we have a wonderful speaker today, Jane Walt. Beverly Wood.
Good afternoon, everyone. Before I introduce our speaker, I just want to remind you that at the end of her presentation, there will be time for questions. And if you are joining us on Zoom, just please raise your hand and our IT person, Hank, will let you in. Many of us who are driving daily by the Emily Dickinson house have noticed a lot of activity going on there. I've been seeing lots of trucks and large construction equipment. Well, today's our lucky day because we're going to hear exactly what has been going on and we can have our questions answered. It's my pleasure to introduce Jane Wald, who is the Executive Director of the Emily Dickinson Museum. Jane's 21 years at the museum has seen operational integration and merger of the Homestead and the Evergreens into a single museum, expansion of the museum's public programs and audiences, and completion of numerous restoration and capital projects. Under her leadership, the Emily Dickinson Museum has completed a long-range plan that achieves complete restoration of historic buildings and grounds and establishes the museum as the premier center for study, interpretation, creative expression, and celebration of Emily Dickinson's life and legacy. Welcome, Jane.
I'm going to rescue my water before anything else. Thanks very much for that introduction and for your invitation to speak today. Yes, you've seen a lot of activity going on just across the street. And frankly, by this time, I thought you would have been seeing less activity. But you know how things have gone in the last couple of years. The unexpected, Emily Dickinson once said something this week. The unexpected is always the same because we are always surprised. There's something paraphrase, not exact, but it's kind of hard to untangle this sometimes. So I want to start. Well, I'd like to show you what's been happening over at the homestead and on the ground. But would like to start right here at the Dickinson homestead in 1855. So this image is one that is part of a lithograph, a map of the town that was actually published in 1858, though the artwork dates before that. And this is the year, 1855, that the Dickinson family returned to the homestead after living for some 15 years in a house next to the West Cemetery. So they had that little absence from the homestead. Came back in 1855. In that year, Edward Dickinson had purchased the homestead for something like $5,000. He invested another $5,000 or so into its renovation, and at the same time spent about $5,000 building the Evergreens. So if we turn that back into, try to translate that into modern dollars, it was a whole lot of money. He was really having quite a building boom just for his own family. Well, the renovations were complete toward the end of that year, toward the end of 1855, and the family must have moved back into the homestead in November or December of that year, because by January of the following year, after some time without corresponding with one of her good friends, Elizabeth Holland, Emily wrote to Elizabeth Holland and described their move. I cannot tell you how we moved. I'd rather not remember. I believe my effects were brought in a bandbox and the deathless me on foot not many moments after. I took at the time a memorandum of my several senses and also of my hat and coat and my best shoes, but it was lost in the melee, and I'm out with lanterns looking for myself. This is one of her more tongue-in-cheek kinds of writings. Such wits as I reserved are so badly shattered that repair is useful, and still I can't help laughing at my own catastrophe. I suppose we were going to make a transit, as heavenly bodies did, but we came budget by budget, as our fellows do, till we fulfilled the pantomime contained in the word move. It is a kind of gone to Kansas feeling, and if I sat in a long wagon with my family tied behind, I should suppose, without a doubt, I was a party of emigrants. I think we can go to the next slide. And she finishes this description by saying, they say that home is where the heart is. I think it is where the house is and the adjacent building. So this was not an entirely successful move back to their family homestead. Emily sort of resented it a little bit. Her mother became kind of an invalid for a little bit of time after that. But that's the building, the 1855 building and floor layout that we are trying to achieve here at the homestead with this particular restoration. So we can go on. So just to compare that first, you might just have in mind the first lithograph image of the homestead, and here's what we've done with the exterior in the last, say, 15 years. But we'll go on to, I'll spend a little bit of time explaining how we have come to where we are now and what's happened over the last few years. So first things first, when the homestead and the Evergreens organized themselves as a single museum in 2003, we went about doing planning, because planning was about all we had the money to do. So we made a big plan, a master plan. It was very, very good. It's still something that we follow today, because it laid out a sequence of projects by their level of urgency. So we began on that plan, and now are moving into the kind of the fun part of the plan, the restoration part of the plan. So infrastructure work we started right away, and that seems to go on and on and on. We made sure that the electrical systems were in good shape and up to modern code. We installed both a fire protection system and a fire detection system that are high-grade museum quality systems, where if and such a fire event were ever to take place, the sprinklers wouldn't dump a lot of water into the houses. It would be a high-pressure mist that would tamp down the threat without as much damage to the interiors of the houses. And then water control has been an issue since the beginning. This is because both houses sit at the bottom of a steep slope, and the soil is about 18 inches down into the soil. You get a layer of clay, so the water is constantly running into the cellars and needs to be managed. And we've done several projects to try to do that. And we have one last one that will happen next year, and that's to finish up controlling the water in the Evergreen cellar. This image, this area right here, that is an actual trough poured into the cement floor. So there was this system of cement troughs running through the Evergreen cellar that took the water out the west side. But that do-it-yourself system is no longer in place. We've improved that with some drainage under that slab. Then we, with that master plan and with that infrastructure plan we take care of, then we began discrete projects as we had the resources to do so. And one of the first, for those of you who have been in Amherst for quite some time, you'll remember that big curtain of hemlock trees in front of both houses. So that was one of the first where we wanted to reveal the houses and to return the landscape design intent of that perimeter, which was a hedge and fence that are 4 to 8 feet tall, and that's what we have now. And then a restoration of Emily Dickinson's home room, completed in 2014. And then after that, restoration of the Homestead Library. And connected with that project was a reconstruction of the conservatory at the front of the house. So the example of the conservatory is something that will follow through in some of the other aspects of the current project that I'll explain. The marvelous thing about that conservatory reconstruction is that the windows you see in this image, those are the original windows from the conservatory. When that small structure was dismantled in the early 20th century, the Park family, who lived there at the time, reused those windows as the lights into the garage that's still standing back there. So at some point, it was discovered that, oh yeah, these really are old windows. They're double pane windows from some of the earliest uses of the conservatory. And so we were able to kind of rescue those elements and reuse them. So then now we're getting closer to the current project. We had a grant from the Massachusetts Cultural Facilities Fund to do some research into the design research for restoring the main block of the homestead. Then we received just an amazing bequest from a longtime board member, William Vickery, who made a gift to maintain and improve the buildings, grounds, and collections. So that gave us some wherewithal to take on this project. As all of that was coming into shape, we opened for our 2020 season on March 1st, and then closed exactly 2 weeks later, along with the rest of the world. And then we spent some time thinking, well, how long is this going to last? And I guess we better start making plans to reopen. Well, that went nowhere fast about reopening. And then we began to think, well, we're sitting on all of this really wonderful design research. So we can go ahead. And began talking about, well, maybe this is an opportunity to implement those plans. Since we can't be open to the public, perhaps we can go ahead with this restoration. And it took us a few months to move those pieces into place. And then we arrived at the scope of what we wanted to accomplish. So in the current project, what's happening over at the homestead right now is that we're restoring the north and south parlors on the west side of the house. We're restoring the hallways in the public areas of the house and the staircase that goes from the first floor to the second floor. And I'll explain more about how we're able to do that. We're opening a new space. It's never been open to the public before. And that's the room at the very top of the stairs to the second floor. And that was a room that we believe was occupied by Emily Dickinson's mother during the last 8 to 10 years of her life, when she had suffered a stroke and had broken her hip, so she was really quite immobile, and that room was adjacent to Emily's room, so Emily could provide care to her. We actually removed a whole staircase, stairs to the third floor, and relocated that into its original location in the 19th century, when Emily Dickinson who live there. We are reproducing and recreating and introducing decorative finishes as our research and hunches kind of lead us toward. And installing a new heating, ventilation, and cooling system and underground electric service. Now this is, you see the dollar signs there. That is the biggest part of this project because we're having to kind of insert all kinds of equipment into the house, outside of the house, and then bring the electrical service from Triangle Street. So we can take down the wires that lead across Main Street to Homestead. So we've got that historic look again. And then one last piece was, a kind of while we're at it piece, and that was to reinstate the path between the Homestead and the Evergreens, described by Emily as just wide enough for two who love. So we can go to the next. Because we are a National Historic Landmark site and have done quite a number of projects that have involved state and federal money, there are quite a number of approvals that we have to go through. Being a National Historic Landmark and in a National Registered District gives us and you status, but no requirements really. So everything else is kind of a separate issue, separate item. So because of state and federal funding, we have a preservation deed restriction that is held by the state and by the National Park Service. And that is, I know that with the potential for CPA funding, you may be thinking about the same thing right now. But let me assure you that the preservation restriction, the time at which it was issued by the state and by the federal government was, fairly restrictive. But that was okay with us because we're a museum. We all have the same goals. Under CPA funding, I think that yours would be held by the town, and that's a different animal. That preservation deed restriction means that the state reviews all of our plans for exterior and interior. That also means that the state archaeologist reviews all our plans. He tells us if we're doing any subsurface work, he tells us whether we need to do some archaeology in advance of that, inserting whatever underground equipment it would be. Then we go to the local historic district commission, the Amherst Historical Commission, the planning board for site plan review. Because of our electrical work, we had to go to the town council, and then two access boards, one at the town level and one at the state level. So that's a bit of a process, and it just takes time. We just have to do it. All right, then the fun begins. Here's where, at least from my perspective, here's where the excitement lies. So here you have a view of the current entry, the south entry to the homestead, and on the right, this is a photograph from about 1916. And we're going to zero in, let's see, I'm just going to point out a couple of things here. One is, you notice a couple of differences between these two photos. One is that there are two pilasters here and just one on the modern photograph. The doorway looks a little different. It's taller. Here, the threshold has been moved up. Here is a full-size door. There's a little medallion right there in the center, and that medallion is actually it's actually a plate, a nameplate for the door, for the Dickinson. And I'll show you a few details about that in just a moment. Investigation, and so this whole restoration is really part building archaeology and part home renovation, where, you know, contractors come in and they stay a little bit longer than you want them to. So this project is a bit like that. But even after our research into the building history, there are always going to be things that we will not find until we get well into the project. And some of those events have come up. And this is an example of one of our consultants, preservation architect, who's trying to figure out something about the original construction of the stair, because that main stair has been it's been kind of rebuilt since the Dickinsons lived there. And then there are finds like this, where just like the conservatory windows, the original balusters for that staircase were removed at some point in the 20th century and stuck off in the garage. So there they are in all their dirty glory. Now they've been buffed up, and they look wonderful, and are just waiting for the time that a new handrail comes in so we can finish that staircase. Other things like this. In the 20th century, the Park family, the Park family took out some mantles from the bedrooms and again, put them away in the garage. So we had to pull them out and replace them. Each one of these, there are 3 of them, and each one measures out just a little bit differently. So we can figure out which mantle went into which room. You'll see an example of that a little bit later. And then, here's that garage loft I've been talking about. So here's a stack of doors. The front door that I'll show you in a moment, it was leaning up against its door friends here. You know, I'm not sure that we know exactly where each of these goes, but every time we do a restoration project, we have an opportunity to figure out one more of those. And then here, Ghosts of the Past, where there was some decorative trim on the stair skirting, kind of like this decorative trim here. But taking that off, we see the original graining in a brown color from the 19th century stair. So so then we have to try to match that color to return it to whatever its 19th century shade and technique had been. So then we can go on. Okay, paint analysis. This is kind of a fun thing where you dig back with just tiny samples, dig back into the layers of paint in different parts of the house, and it's a little bit of a game of kind of lining up the common layers and seeing what other layers there may have been in certain places that predated that and other layers that postdated that. So the idea is to match them up sort of like this so that you find the common thread between all of the decorative schemes in the house. This image on the left, you see a brown strip at the top of that window architrave. The reason that remained brown when all the rest of it was painted white was because of a 20th century staircase that was put into the 3rd floor, which we are now taking away, revealing that kind of evidence that now helps us figure out the whole decorative scheme for the 1st and 2nd floors. So we'll go on to. So this is kind of what we're working with. On the left, we have the main block. This is the part of the house that was built in 1813. By 1855, in that big renovation that I explained that Edward Dickinson did before the family moved back, the rooms had been changed. Here's the conservatory, a new east wing, and a new rear addition. So this area had been added before the Dickinsons moved back. This whole back section Edward replaced. He replaced a smaller structure back there when the family moved. So as we go through this restoration, we're going to find evidence both of this floor plan and that floor plan. And I can show an example of that later. So let's go to the next slide. And so you've seen this picture before. But what I'd like to zoom in on is this door. So we can go to that. Okay, here's that nameplate I mentioned. And it's a little hard to see in this photograph, but it's an etched glass. And the Jones Library has a very high quality version of this photograph. So high quality that you can see exactly the pattern of the etched glass. So that pattern is being reproduced for the door that we found in the garage. So we can go to the next one. And here it is. So that's the area of the nameplate. You can see little bits and pieces of the etched glass that are the ones that were not broken off. But the whole thing, combined with the photographic evidence, means that we can put it back together as it was originally. So we'll go to see a few details where the nameplate was. Here's kind of an East Lake style lock plate and some of the etching. All right, well now we're going to go inside the house to show a little bit more of the investigation that takes place and the research, the sort of building archaeology that gets to take place to help us figure out what this house really should have looked like. So here we are looking, standing at the front of the house, looking toward the back of the house on the second floor. And that's the staircase we're going to take out. But up here you see a little bit of the plaster at the ceiling level has been removed. And that reveals some wallpaper that had been trapped above that later ceiling. So we'll go to that. So above that ceiling level, so the ceiling was higher in the 19th century, but above that ceiling level, we find at least 3 different wallpapers. So here's number 1, which we think is the oldest. Number 2 is kind of an arts and crafts style paper, so that's later 19th century. And then here's this 3rd one that may be a 20th century wallpaper. So this gives us just enough evidence, along with a few other scraps. So putting all these wallpaper fragments together, we can figure out the pattern, which is the next slide. So it will be a kind of a Gothic geometric pattern like this that will go back. And if we have time, I can tell you a story about the blue or the green, which actually isn't going to end up in the later paper, but it's kind of interesting. But I'll leave that aside for the moment. We can come back to it in questions and answers. Okay, so the staircase is now gone. You can see this lovely curve here in the staircase, and then again, that part of the window architrave is now open for inspection. So right here, that was the access to the staircase in Emily Dickinson's time. Emily's room is it's just out of the picture. It's just right here. So during her day, there was no staircase here to the 3rd floor, but rather it was behind that door. So there we've inserted the staircase again. That's the end of the hall with some of the painting already accomplished. The other side of that staircase, we can go to that one, runs through this new room that I said is at the top of the stairs on the 2nd floor. When what's kind of interesting about this is, I don't think you can see it here, but right up here, above that door, inside the staircase door, was this really interesting geometric wallpaper that we took down and we salvaged it, but there was just so much interesting evidence of, the exact angle of the staircase, exactly where the steps were, how the whole thing was decorated. So those kind of survivals are just really wonderful information. This room, this blue room, is the room in which Emily Norcross stays, and Emily's mother, where she spent the last years of her life. And this passage, which leads to Emily's room right here, that's the door to her room. So it's just an area that's about 5 feet long, but that was how Emily was able to get to her mother quickly and take care of her in those last years. And so this work has now progressed a little further. So it's now sort of encased. A new wall has been returned to its original place. So I'll call it a new wall, but it's really a restored wall. And that mantle that we saw outside has now been put back in place in this room. So we can go to that right here. And we think by this point it was a mantle for a stove, that the fireplace had been blocked up and they were using stove heat. Just around the corner here, just in a little cavity right there to the left, we found this wonderful paper. So this is a whole kind of vine and hops paper, and that's been recreated for us and printed by a very specialized wallpaper manufacturer in New York, in Saratoga Springs, and it's just gorgeous. I don't have a picture of it for us today, but it looks very like this. It's just a great reproduction. Now we'll go downstairs to the first floor. Now we're looking at the front door. This is what you're probably most familiar with. The Park family removed the 19th century door and made sidelights. It was very typical of a kind of colonial revival style of decorating, so that's been removed, and now the front door has been put back in place. So it's about 9 feet tall. It's a pretty significant door, not as tall as the doors here, I suspect. But, yeah. And then if we turn around, this is standing close to the front door, looking toward the back. And this staircase this is where all of those balusters will go back in along this staircase. So other interesting finds, we'll go on to the next one. Other interesting finds are, we weren't quite sure what to do about the first floor cover. But often in houses of that period, there would have been floor cloths because they were very durable in a highly trapped space like the front hall. So this is a little remnant of floor cloth that we found in a closet in the evergreen. And it was, obviously a floor cloth that had been well used, and in its, second life, it was put into a closet. But there are other examples of that same pattern in other institutions. So we figured, since this is a Dickinson document, we would use that for restoring and putting floor covering in the front hall of the homestead. And so that will be ready in just a few weeks. But we'll see what that looks like. trying to reproduce this gives us, the next slide, something like this. And this will actually, it'll get some varnish on it, so the color will be knocked back just a little bit. But taking all these things together, you've seen the front door, you've seen the wallpaper, the floor covering. There's a rendering of what this front hall was going to look like. But the rendering was done before we figured out the floor cloth. So if we go to the next slide, you can see it'd be something like this. Except if we try to put that new floor cloth in there, then we can, it'll be more like that. So I'm going to ask a favor, and that is to cut me off when I talk too long. Or, give me a 5-minute warning or something like that. It's just so interesting to go through these details. But if you go to the next slide, we can talk a little bit about the parlor. So this is what's familiar to you. This is sort of the last iteration of the parlor. And our particular problem in the parlor was kind of a lack of evidence. So we can go to the next slide where mostly we had just verbal descriptions. Thomas Wentworth Higginson called it a parlor dark and cool and stiffish. Emily's niece, Martha, let us know that the wallpaper was white with large figures. And she also described a carpet. So the carpet was a fabulous Brussels woven in a pattern. It had in the center a great basket of flowers from which roses were spilling all over the floor to a border of more flowers at the edge. Okay, so that's about all we had, except for knowing that, go to the next slide, knowing that at one time there were pocket doors. This is the pocket door track that we could find between the walls. These are the pocket doors that have been reproduced. We had to work on the fireplaces. We'll go next. So the fireplace has been, all the marble on the fireplace has been shaken off so that we could rebuild the firebox. And rebuilding the fireboxes, we'll go to that one, is a messy job. So part of the goal here was to reveal the original hearth, which throughout the house, there were modern floors like these on top of the original floors. So we wanted to take off the modern floors and reveal the original floors. But what that meant was that, we needed to adjust for what historically was done. They adjusted for the height of the modern floors and just put in a concrete slab as a new hearth. The original hearth is underneath. So that's kind of exciting. And when it's all said and done, this is a rebuild. And that's the original hearth. You can see just in the edges that the floorboards are up, and I can show you a little bit more about that in a minute. And we'll go to the next one. Paint analysis gives us a couple of different gray colors for the paint. Interestingly, at least to me, was that we chose this wallpaper without knowing exactly what the paint scheme was. But then in the end, they came together just beautifully. The wallpaper, actually, we didn't have the wallpaper evidence for this particular period. So the wallpaper we chose is white with large figures. Yeah. And this comes from, this is a paper that's been hanging here in the Farnsworth homestead in Maine since the 1860s. So it's just, right in our period. And you get to be some of the first to walk into the homestead parlor. So that's what it looks like today. You can see these are the original 1813 floors. And here's more of the fun of the fun of the hunt. And we'll go to this. Okay, original 1813 floors, and I don't know if you can, it's a little faint, but you can see some outlines here, and even a different color. So this gives us, if you think back to that 1813 floor plan that I showed you, these are the walls from that 1813 floor plan. So we can go to the next one that sort of outlines it just a little bit better for you. See. And then so this is in the north parlor, sort of the back of the house. In the main parlor, for the front of the house, there was something even more interesting that nobody had had a clue about. And that is that we found there's been a wall running down the center of that parlor from north to south in this direction. And these little faint outlines here, there was a false fireplace in there. So we can go to the next one and it'll sort of fill this out a little bit more. So this is kind of the profile of the false fireplace. So they had a wall running through the center of the room, fireplace on that side, a mantle on this side, probably a stove that had a pipe running all the way to the flue. We just found this last week, so we don't understand it completely. It's still a bit of a mystery, and we can't even. So far, we haven't had the time to figure out who was living at the house at the time and why they needed that extra room. So for the basket of flowers, we looked and looked and looked for something that would correspond to a basket of flowers, and then finally, someone recommended they said they knew of a point paper, which is basically a pattern, from 1849 that was owned by a Brussels carpet weaver in England. So yeah, they showed us this point paper, and it sort of fills the bill. Here we've got baskets of flowers in a pattern with flowers running out to the edge. And then in the next slide this is the woven carpet. So this is coming to us in a couple of weeks. Woven in England, and it's beautiful, just beautiful. So again, if we put all of these things together, a preliminary rendering of this before we kind of had all the details is a next slide. And this is so far different from our recent sense of the homestead that I hope we'll be able to tolerate it. Well, this is the last thing I have to show you about the house, and I don't know how we're doing on time, but if you want anything about the path, I can show you that too. Sure, perfect. Yeah, okay. Not too much. Not too much here. There's the next slide is this is a 1920s picture of the little path, just wide enough for two who love, going from the homestead to the Everglades. And so this is what we know about it is kind of memoir from Emily's niece Martha. So she told us that there was a tall pine at either edge of the path, and the children, they're the three Dickinson children, there was always some one of us running back and forth between. So for some reason, it's very evocative to Martha, and for us, there's a practical issue here, and that is that we need an accessible way to get from the homestead to the Evergreens and back, because it really is, I mean, it's a mess. Very soggy. So if we go to the next slide, here's the opposite view from looking toward the homestead. I think maybe we'll go past the next one to this again, there's a great story that goes along with this little drawing, but we can come back to that if we want to. So this was the recent condition of that path, and it just is a muddy mess on many days. So to be able to provide an accessible route between the two houses and to try to do more of that water control that I mentioned very early on, there's some stuff that has to go below the path. So that's why there have been so many trucks and earth moving equipment there. They have to put all this conduit and drainage pipe in there. So it's been kind of a big project. So we'll do the next one. And there is, this is the top coat coming along. Oh, one interesting thing is right around here, we discovered a well, or at least a dry well, that we hadn't known about. And in the course of this piece of this project, much of that sort of overcrowded landscape up the slope was cleared out, and we tried to do everything we could, and this is through guesswork, trying to figure out where those old 19th century daffodils were. And I think it was relatively successful, so because you can see the shoots coming up, and the last slide is one from just today. This is there at about 12 o'clock today. So that's what we've been up to, and there's still a bit more to come, but we'll be eager to welcome you sometime this summer.
Thank you.
Excuse me, are you doing anything with the other house? Is that going to be renovated?
That, the Evergreens, actually, that will be closed for the rest of this year because we are trying to improve the environment in that house for the collection. That house has had pretty poor temperature and humidity control. So we're going to make those improvements this year. There'll be a little more work to do there, again, with the heating, ventilation, and cooling system next year. Then it will be open again. But the year after that, we're commissioning a study that will tell us exactly what is possible to do in that house. So, for example, there's some failing wallpaper and some failing plaster. And as much as possible, we'd like to save the wallpaper, but that means we have to save the plaster behind the wallpaper. Right? So figuring out how to do that.
I mean, I was in the Evergreen house, I guess. We had a tour in those, and it was such a contrast between Emily Dickerson house and the Evergreen.
Well, it is, and that's an important point, I think, because the homestead, our approach there is to restore it to something like what Emily Dickinson knew. But to do that, we have to reproduce things that will then reproduce decor that will then appear to be new, right? It won't have that same patina that finishes do at the Evergreens. So On the other hand, at the Evergreen, so much of that 19th century atmosphere and flavor is right there in place that, at least for now, I mean, well, I'm here, we will try to conserve it and preserve it in place rather than restore it to make it look new.
Anybody online?
I have one. So when is it gonna open? So that we can go in, take a tour.
Yeah, you know, yeah, that's, I knew I wasn't going to be able to set a date until April. And I'm thinking it has to be the end of April because things still change. There's still some delays with artists and getting all that together. But, if I were to make a guess, it would be some month beginning with J.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Jane, and we'll present you with one of our women's club mugs. You can have your coffee or tea or whatever. And we will be planning a club tour to the house, to the museum. When it's open, we'll probably want to be one of your first visitors. So we'll be going as a group, so we'll let you know when that happens. So, thank you again. Join us in the dining room for tea and refreshments, and thank you for coming. Thank you. Thank you. So, I will be going